Hello. Oi. Hola. How's YouTube doing? Alright, so I'm a little late to the party on. I've been meaning to do this for quite some time, and I'm pretty slow at this, as you can tell from one video to the next. And who was it? Voice of college football. Kind of got the, how do you want to say, stirring the pot a little bit with an old debate. 97. Michigan, who went undefeated, and Nebraska, who went undefeated. How many teams that year did we have that absolutely, if we had a 4-team, 6-team playoff, would have been phenomenal to see? Tennessee, you had Florida State, you had Florida, Michigan, you had Nebraska, you had Ohio State, Washington State, you had UCLA, you had all these different teams that had an argument. But of course, who were the two teams that were at the very top? And still a heated debate to this day, match up beautifully.
Day by day, it gets better and better. Team can't be beat. Won't be beat.
Physicality and the tenacity and the meanness of Nebraska.
To play on our team in 97, you had to be physical. That went from the nose guard all the way to the kicker and the quarterback.
Just a finishing mentality and finishing teams off. When you got them down, step on their throat.
Going head to head with what is Michigan's strength.
Glenn Steele led the nation's stingiest defense that allowed only 9.5 points a game and held teams scoreless in the fourth quarter all the way into November.
Tenacity, meanness, toughness, very physical at the point of attack. How would those two Goliaths, how would they have matched up?
For the entire season, everybody in America, especially the last month or so, wanted Michigan and Nebraska to meet. I'm the only person who could pull it off.
Now, when I was watching the Voice of College Football, when he was doing his own individual breakdown of the game, when he had people from the Michigan side call in, and they kept going over the same thing over and over. And to me, while it's relevant, wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, where the focus and the fun of the focus of the game coulda, woulda, shoulda been. All they talked about, the strength of schedules, common opponents that they played, how were they ranked in the beginning, how were they ranked in the end.
Really, the only thing that Nebraska fans could hang their hat on is that they wrecked Tennessee in the orange.
And they wrecked Texas A&M the game prior in the Big 12 championship game.
Well, was A&M really that good?
They were a top 15 team in the country. If you're going to say Texas A&M wasn't any good, then you're going to have to say Penn State wasn't any good.
They were for a while. And generally the consensus was if Michigan wins by 1 point, they're the clear number one national championship.
Why, though?
Because they had a better body of work throughout the entire season. Missouri took them to overtime. Missouri ended up, weren't they like a 6-5 team?
Michigan had a game against Iowa in which they were losing in the fourth quarter and won 28-24 against a 7-5 Iowa team.
Do you really think that Missouri and Iowa are... I mean, I know they have comparable records. Do you think they're comparable teams?
The same AP voters that you are giving credit to ranked Missouri at the end of the year at 7-5 and did not rank Iowa.
They ranked Missouri at 7 wins?
23.
That's embarrassing.
They kept beating that like a dead horse. Oh, and of course national rankings in terms of where was their defenses ranked nationally, where was their offenses ranked nationally, how many yards a game, etc. Just stats. Stats is all they really talked about. To me, what the fun of the conversation is styles, matchups. These players, this is a matchup dream. You look at the offensive line of Nebraska, defensive line of Michigan. You look at the offensive line of Michigan and the defensive line of Nebraska. Strengths all across the board. Nebraska's defensive line, one of the best defensive lines Nebraska has ever had. Well, I don't know if it's one of the better offensive lines Michigan's ever had, but a very good offensive line.
We had an offensive line that you would die for. John Jansen, Backus, Hutchinson, and Adamy, and Brandt. I don't know if there's a better line anywhere than that.
3 top NFL draft picks, and one of which went on to be a 7 or 9 time All-Pro in Hutchinson, so that would have been 2 strengths going head to head. Michigan's secondary is, I would make the argument, actually is their strength. I think their defensive line was actually the weakness of that juggernaut of a defense that Michigan had. Just on paper, and just the mentality of both of these teams just made for such a good matchup. That's one of the reasons why I still talked about today. I just want to look at the last 2 games. Michigan, who they played, was Ohio State and Washington State. Nebraska, their last 2 games was Texas A&M in the Big 12 championship and Tennessee. Alright, I lied. I will do a few numbers before we get into all the other meat and potatoes. I think Nebraska and Florida State were the only teams to have offense and defense and special teams all ranked in the top 7 of the country. Michigan obviously had the best defense in the country. Strength of schedule. Big Ten was pretty overrated. They didn't do well in the bowl games. They didn't finish very strong at the end of the year. Host of the Voice of College Football did a good job pointing out how actually, while on paper, Michigan had a much stronger schedule at the beginning of the year. At the end of the year, actually, Nebraska had a stronger schedule. And I'll show you that clip right now.
Michigan's schedule was tougher on paper in the preseason than Nebraska's, but maybe Nebraska's schedule turned out to be a little bit tougher in the end because Michigan took on 7 ranked teams, but only 3 of them finished ranked. Ohio State, Penn State, and of course Washington State in the Rose Bowl. Nebraska took on 4 ranked teams at the time of the kickoff, but 5 finished ranked.
I don't care about the politics.
There was clearly collusion is the right word, but there was some type of manipulation between the coaches to. I mean, I hate to be the conspiracy theorist here.
With Osborne retiring, you know, a lot of the coaches saw favoritism towards Osborne. Maybe, maybe not. All I really care about is looking at how these teams might have matched up. No, but in all seriousness, when you look at these two teams, physicality standpoint, that was Michigan's MO. That was Nebraska's MO. That was their brand. Nebraska's strength was their offensive line. That's no secret. Now, it's not legal anymore, but that chop block they utilized and mastered. They were so good at getting defensive linemen and linebackers off their feet. It was all about subversion. And that goes for within the box blocking, and that also goes for on the exterior when they would run the option. Anything to the outside, it was all about trying to get people off their feet. And the wide receivers were killer at doing that. Looking at Michigan, their defense, they were just an all-around balanced defense. I feel like their strength was in the back 7. The speed and tenacity and tackling of the back 7, as well as being able to be really, really tight on their coverages. How many? I think 133 yards. 133 yards in pass efficiency is how many yards that they gave up through the air. That's pretty damn good. That's the one thing that would have been fascinating in this matchup was because Michigan had such a good secondary, how well would they have played against the play action? We are not even going to bother talking about Nebraska's wide receivers and Michigan's secondary because Charles Woodson, Heisman winner, one of the better corners I've ever seen.
The throw has good protection going deep down the left sideline. Woodson picks it off at the Michigan 45-yard line.
He was the single best athlete I've ever seen in college football.
He was going to take care of half the field.
Michigan's strength was in their secondary. One of the worst passing teams I've ever seen. They weren't trying to pretend how they knew how to pass. Those wide receivers were 100% offensive linemen. They behaved like offensive linemen. They were in corners' faces like offensive linemen. And they had no intentions whatsoever of really catching any passes. The only time they really were actually trying to catch passes was they would run at your face as if they were going to block you. Then they would just swim right by you. Or they would distract you as if they were going to block you while one of their other receivers were running, crossing a route behind you. Off play action, of course. Option left, option right, option left, option right, option right, option left. 5 or 6 different types of option. Pretty Houdini-like. Their trap game, their ISOs. To me, that makes Woodson irrelevant. You can blitz him. You can blitz him like crazy. But I think where Woodson would really make his impact would be on special teams and as a wide receiver. I think his biggest impact in this game would be as a wide receiver. How quickly would Michigan's front 7 begin to tire through the duration of the game, and how many guys would be able to stay healthy through the duration of the game, through that physicality and brutality in terms of what Nebraska's offensive line would do. And when I look at Michigan, when they played Washington State, when they played Ohio State, nobody was blocking the way Nebraska's offensive line blocks, which is why it would be a little bit of a shocker, or at least something that Michigan's defense would have to adjust to. Most teams couldn't, which is why they were the top rushing offense, not only that year, but also multiple years. It's because nobody could really handle the way that they blocked. That Texas A&M defense was very athletic, and they did not let themselves get subverted as much. They held Nebraska to their lowest rushing total. They were really the only defense that was able to hold Nebraska down from a rushing standpoint, but obviously they still gave up 300 some odd yards, 54 points out of the deal. Tennessee's defense In the first half, they held Nebraska to their lowest rushing total of all season. They held them to 69 yards just in the first half. They were crowding like crazy the box. They were putting 9 guys, 10 guys in the box. This game is sort of legendary in terms of how tired they were getting. Obliterated up front. Even though they were holding Nebraska down, they were getting tired fast.
They were stopping us behind the line of scrimmage. One play, I remember he tackled me, and he's like, "Ahmad, this is how we play football in the SEC. This is how we play defense." I'm like, okay, but this is the first quarter.
In the first half, those Tennessee guys were just talking. In the second half, they didn't say a word because we were just mowing them over. They were on the ground.
When did I know we had Tennessee? We put the ball in the end zone in the first quarter, and their All-American outside linebacker came up to me and said, "Man, you guys are good."
Came back in the second half. In the third quarter, they were able to get 227 yards just in the third quarter. 409 rushing yards in the entirety of the game. Those Michigan defensive linemen were very big and very strong at the point of attack, but they don't look nearly as athletic. Ohio State was able to run on them a little bit. Even Washington State, not a great offensive line, not a great running back. And yes, I get it, they were spreading people out. But even Washington State had great moments of being able to run on Michigan, right? So how are we going to know that Nebraska can do to them what they've done to everybody else? We don't. Yet simultaneously, we saw it on paper. We saw it on paper. We saw it against Ohio State. We saw it against Washington State. We saw it against a couple other teams, even teams that Michigan dominated, that they don't do that great against the run. See, they held people down to 89 yards a game. That's not bad, but that's still not necessarily what you would think of a defense. If there ever was a defense that could hold down this type of offense and the way Nebraska ran the football, that's not the kind of defense you think is actually going to be able to hold them down. Where the fun is, in terms of really trying to analyze this game, is that flooded NFL Nebraska defensive line going against a flooded NFL offensive line in Michigan. They have 3 eventual NFL starters on that offensive line. Steve Hutchinson, an eventual Hall of Famer. I don't know how many Pro Bowls that guy had. I want to say 7 or 9. You had Jeff Backus at offensive tackle, and then John Jansen. John Jansen was a high draft pick as well. Now, one thing that I think needs to be mentioned about this Michigan offensive line is how well they pass blocked. I'm not sure the offense was really designed for Brian Griese to be much of a, how do you want to say? I mean, again, it was a different era, but I'm not sure Brian Griese was really in an offense that was allowing him to shine. They didn't really start letting him stretch the field until that Washington State game. Now, Nebraska's D-line was actually riddled with talent. I mean, right off the bat, the big dogs that got all the accolades was Grant Wistrom at defensive end, multiple-year All-American, Lombardi Award winner, and eventual All-Pro, Super Bowl winner with the Rams, as well as the Seattle Seahawks. Jason Peter, defensive tackle, one of the best run stuffers I've ever seen, one of the best at using his hands. He was a top draft pick as well. I believe he went in the first round. Mike Rucker, he became eventual All-Pro for the Carolina Panthers, as well as almost beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. And then, of course, the other defensive tackle, Jason Wiltz. And Jason Wiltz was a all-conference player his senior year and a high draft pick. But all four of those starters were NFL guys, and 2 of them were all pros. 1 of them was a consistent NFL starter, but then injuries kicked them out. Their strength was the front 7 against the run. They only gave up 73 yards on the ground, and I think that was third in the country. Pass efficiency, yeah, not so much. I think Michigan absolutely would have had their moments to where they were able to run the football. The A-Train, Chris Howard. Michigan's running backs were nothing like Jamal Lewis. Jamal Lewis for Tennessee went on to be a 2,000-yard rusher in the NFL for the Baltimore Ravens. Michigan's offense would have success is within their tight ends. Brian Griese was a hell of a quarterback, but I think playing in that offense, I think actually held him back a little bit. They only averaged 26 points a game. It's not like Michigan's offense was really any good. Brian Griese, which would have been under pressure a lot of the game. So the next question that you got to ask yourself is if the weakness of Nebraska's defense was that secondary and those young corners, freshman, sophomore, those young corners, Ty Streets, just like in that Washington State game, Ty Streets going down the sidelines in a fly pattern. What if he would have been able to get 1 or 2 off in that game? And how much would that have pulled the safeties back? Momentum, all about momentum. Hit that tight end a couple times, hit Ty Streets. very underrated receiver, but still not on peerless price. Marcus Nash, Jermaine Copeland was a really good NFL player. Peerless Price was an eventual All-Pro for Tennessee. Those guys were all locked down. Nebraska safeties, by the end of the year, were playing so airtight. One of the things that I think is the most important element when you evaluate any team, I don't care what year it is, I don't care if it's this year, 2002, 2001, 2022, 2023, 1997, I don't care. It's all about how were teams playing at the end of the year. And the way teams were playing at the end of the year in that 97, Michigan, they started fast throughout the rest of the year, and once they played Ohio State and Washington State, they were not playing as well. Or at least that's how those teams were making them look. Close games, but they still won. They found a way to win. Nebraska was playing their best ball at the end of the year. Dominant football. Texas A&M was a very good team and almost beat that talented UCLA team. Tennessee was loaded with NFL talent and Hall of Famers, and Nebraska made them look bad. So really at the end of the day, Nebraska has Michigan outclassed pretty much at every level.
All of us were talking, it's just like, we gotta just line up and play on the lawn. We're here, let's go ahead and play a game.
We would have beat them. There's no doubt about it. We were so much faster than they were. We'd put it to them.
There's no question about it.
This just in. Nebraska, champions in the ESPN USA Today coaches poll. Earlier this evening, Michigan winning the championship in the AP poll. But this is the coaches poll just released. Nebraska with 32 first place votes. Michigan finishes with 30. So 23.5 first place votes shifted to Nebraska after the 25-point win here in the Orange Bowl.
This would have been a tough call for Michigan. Played the more complete season. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Michigan would have won the game. There's a difference there between measuring the resumes versus who I believe would have won the game. In 1998, the BCS was upon us. And so 1 year later, we would have had Michigan versus Nebraska. Bam.
Call it a barbershop, call it a backyard discussion to a couple beers. Makes it for a fun discussion. So anyway, that's my angle. What do you guys think?